Latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and on our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point, we're looking at Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to India. Extremely glad to have Ambassador Gautam Bambawale. He's been India's ex-envoy to China, to Pakistan, and to Bhutan. Ambassador, good to see you, sir. We can't hear you. I think you are muted, but meanwhile, let me introduce our other guest, Jayadeva Ranade, who's a known China expert. Mr. Ranade, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Gautam Bambawale.
Ambassador Bambawale, just checking if your audio is working currently. Okay, no, we can't hear you, so you're muted somewhere on your phone. Either if you can... hopefully he'll come back. Mr. Rande, just getting you to talk about what's happened. Wang Yi meeting the NSA, both sides had officially not even made public the meeting, and then the External Affairs Minister. Do you think that India has conveyed a strong message in tough language to China?
Yes, I think, I can't confirm the tough language, but by going by what the External Affairs Minister said in his briefing, it's apparent that inside the room, the language was tough. They've also, I think, described the atmosphere as cordial, which in diplomacy doesn't mean, it is a great atmosphere. I think the manner in which the visit took place, in fact, is quite curious. The Chinese not wanting us to announce that he's coming here, and then he comes in late in the evening. I wonder why that was, unless it was to avoid the possibility of any demonstrations taking place, and secondly, maybe to try and give impression to the US and the West that China is having some kind of a confabulation with India, which is far from the truth. I think, but the texts that have come out indicate very clearly that nothing much happened in the talks. India gave its point of view, and I think would have done so fairly sternly.
We've seen the briefing that the External Affairs Minister himself gave this time, indicating the importance there. He said it was the Chinese who had requested to keep it low-key, which is pretty interesting. But there is clear unanimity in India's position in terms of it cannot be business as usual until you sort out what's happened since April 2020 on the border.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is one of the reasons why the External Affairs Minister himself gave the briefing, to show to the people that our position is firm and that we are not going to yield ground. Secondly, if I may just take this opportunity to mention that the itinerary that Wang Yi had for his tour is also very curious. It certainly doesn't make for having a good discussion in India. It was extremely insensitive to our requirements. He went to Pakistan. He included Bhutan and Nepal in his itinerary, and Afghanistan. And in Pakistan, to make matters worse, as if to rub salt in our wounds, he attends a meeting, for the first time, mind you, by China ever, of the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference. And there he backs Pakistan's position on the Kashmir issue. Now, that is certainly not calculated for him to gain any brownie points in India. And we will discuss the India part when he came here. Again, the points that he made are not points on which there could be any meeting ground. So I think he got a fairly frank appraisal from India In fact, I think the External Affairs Minister made it a point of saying that he was quite honest with him. I think would have been almost brutally honest in saying what can and cannot be done. But the Chinese also, if I may say, the Chinese foreign minister also made clear by saying, according to the readout that I see, telling the national security advisor, who's also the special representative for border talks, telling him that we must take a long-term perspective of the border issue. In other words, nothing great is going to come out of the army commander level talks. And and he said, he almost said, let's put it in its proper place. In other words, let's restore the rest of the relationship. To which he got a response saying that nothing of the sort. So I think there's no progress in that, and he should not have expected any better. So I wonder what exactly they were planning or they were anticipating when they planned this visit. Unless, and here I'm going to make a bit of a, going by precedent, unless they thought we'd just roll over and accept what they say. And I think they would have got a rude shock at that.
That's going to be my next question. What, in your assessment, was the Chinese tactic, plan, strategy? What did they want?
Well, Wang Yi, I think, would have wanted a couple of things. One was to push India to start looking at the rest of the relationship. And he made a couple of very, shall I say, deceptive points. He said that China is not looking for a unipolar Asia, which is, absolutely untenable. We all know what China's position is, what its military activities are also. The second, he pointed to something, he put it in a different way, but he said China is open to a one plus in this region, meaning he didn't spell it out. It appeared to be as if joint projects in the region, but I think his actual reference or implication would have been to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar proposal, and trying to say that let's move ahead on that. I think he's not going to get any joy on that either. So if we look at it from that point of view, he did come with his points, but he didn't get anything. And as I said, the planning itself was wrong. Had the itinerary been planned properly, at least the atmospherics would have been better, if nothing else.
So, from the Chinese point of view, since you were mentioning the Chinese MFA statements, the brief ones that have come out, when they say keep border issue at the appropriate place, now can you expand on that? What does that mean from the Chinese point of view? Status quo as of now, not as of April 2020.
There are two things here. One, this keep the border issue at its proper place is a standard line that the Chinese have been saying after April 2020, which is, it's got two parts in it. One, let's keep the border issue aside. We'll keep talking about that. But meanwhile, let's bring back the economy, etc. to the level. That has not been opted. Then first, let's settle the border issue. That means where you guys are now, you must go back. Then we will start talking. So that is one which was clear. China was pushing for that. The second, yes, it does mean that they are where they are, and they don't seem to have any, they have given no indication that they're willing to pull back to the April 2020 positions. And that was there also in the remark that he made to the National Security Advisor, where he said that we should take a long-term perspective. That means it's going to be many, many years before things start moving on that front.
A quick response to a viewer question, Mr. Ranade from Kurt Cobain. Given the power asymmetry, can India-China's border dispute only be managed and not resolved? How does this impact Indian ambitions of regional integration?
Well, there are two separate tracks on this. Firstly, the power asymmetry does exist, but that doesn't mean that China cannot be tackled. I'm using the word tackled and not managed. We have seen what happened in Doklam. in 2017. There was a 73-day standoff. India didn't blink, and we are seeing the situation now. So power asymmetry is one thing. The second is the ability to use it, and the third is the capability of the armed forces. The Chinese have certainly been restructuring, they've been training, etc., but their forces have never seen battle. Ours have seen they are battle-hardened troops. They've served in high altitudes, and the reports that we see about Chinese troops and their ability to stay on in high altitudes leave some questions there. The second point about regional integration, we have been advocating regional integration. We've been trying to do it with all the countries, but then the Chinese have also stepped in, and with more dollars which they can throw around. However, that hasn't worked everywhere, and I can readily mention the example of the Maldives, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka too. In fact, they were here recently, though they are negotiating a new loan with China. I think the Chinese are getting a pushback in their own way. In Nepal also, there are some problems. The Nepalese went ahead and joined an American-sponsored program. The Chinese are unhappy, and I would guess that's one reason why Wang is going to Kathmandu.
So yes, Kathmandu and probably Bangladesh after that as well. Since you're talking about what the Chinese motive for this meeting could be, or one of the motives, what about the RIC summit or the BRICS summit? A question that Jayadeva is also asking. The meeting was a precursor to the BRICS summit. How do you think that would pan out, given both Russian isolation and the LSE crisis? Would it be wise for the Prime Minister to visit personally? How important is that summit for the Chinese?
Well, the BRICS summit is very important for the Chinese. It's essentially a China-led organization, and the Chinese economy overwhelms all the other member states' economies put together. So it is a Chinese sort of outfit. The other is the SCO, and there are summits due in both. China certainly one is the big thing for Xi Jinping himself, who is facing criticism internally. Chinese economy is not in a good shape. Internationally, China runs the risk of being isolated, and Xi Jinping certainly wants the BRICS summit to go ahead. But again, let me stress a point that with the Chinese forces being deployed as they are, unless they go back to April 2020 positions, I think it would not only be a bad idea, it would be a terrible idea if our Prime Minister goes to Beijing for the summit. He should not go. In fact, by not going, it will be denting China's image and Xi Jinping's image, which at this time, considering what they've done to us, is a wise thing to do. Final point, if I may make in this context, is that China's always had this feeling that regardless of any actions that they may take against us or punishment that they may mete out to us, India, after a while, will come back and accept the Chinese position. An effort to bend our will, if I may say, is what also this tries to represent. And that we must certainly not do. And I'm almost certain that this government will not do it.
You mentioned it earlier, Mr. Ranade, but if the attempt was to reach out, for China to reach out, a lot of double fork tongue speak here. I mean, considering what you mentioned earlier, the OIC statements and the resolution.
Exactly. That's why I said the itinerary was curious. What they have said and done before the visit is very odd indeed. It's not calculated to, win them any friends, and certainly not here. It's not. It was not designed to prepare the ground for some kind of reciprocity from us. So I don't think it was well planned. Unless, and I come back to the point I just made, they were so confident that India would accept what they say, since a reasonable, quote unquote, amount of time has gone by since the Chinese ingressed here in April 2020.
And we can't forget the decades of China Park, the nexus, and where all that has led us. We saw what happened. It wasn't just the OIC. Wang Yi met, of course, the Prime Minister, as of now at least, and the Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, when he was there.
quite right, absolutely right.
And the parade. I forgot about the parade, the Pakistan parade, where Wang was present and the GF-17s were flown.
Yeah, and he was enjoying the parade and watching the aircraft that, of course, the Chinese have made for the Pakistanis. But here, I'll just add one more point, though it may not appear directly related, which is that, as you know, North Korea has just launched a missile one day ago, and let's not forget that that missile is a result of a China brokered deal between Pakistan and North Korea.
Right. He's seeing those pictures. Another question from Salvador Babones. He appears on StratNews Global. He's an American who's in Australia, a professor, a writer, an author. Question here. As India's military capabilities improve, and thanks for that Australian dollars, $10, Salvador, improve, can you imagine a scenario under which India would copy China's behavior and seek to unilaterally advance the LAC by seizing a mountain ridge somewhere?
I don't think so. It won't happen. Absolutely not. India is quite content with the area that it has. It has enormous problems and very high objectives in trying to develop itself and improve the people's quality of life. So I don't think you're going to see India getting expansive. It never has, actually. And we've been quite willing to settle through international arbitration, even when there are, areas of friction, like it was with Sri Lanka and the island.
Right. Just wanted to get your thoughts, Mr. Ranade, on what's happening in Europe, Ukraine, Russia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm just going to quickly take in some questions, and you can, give you an overall picture on that. Here is one from Makaran Joshi. He says, did the Chinese decide to take this opportunity to exert a little subtle pressure on India, sensing that the West may be a little annoyed with India regarding its neutral stand in Ukraine? There is another one, but just Varun Pratap, who says, has the Ukraine invasion by Russia got anything to do with this China approach? Russia still seems to be clueless, given their main objectives have not been met. But the larger issue of where where India and China are vis-a-vis what's happening in Europe, Mr. Ranade.
Well, people are pointing to so-called similarity between the positions that China has taken and India has taken on the entire issue, by abstaining at the votes of the UN. But the point is that both are prompted by entirely different circumstances. As far as the Chinese are concerned, and this is important to underline, there is an ideological kinship between China and Russia. The leaders of both, that means Xi Jinping and Putin, are both creatures of their respective communist parties. Xi Jinping has nurtured the relationship and enhanced it with Putin personally and with Russia. And I'm sure that when, in fact, it is almost certain that when Putin went to Beijing on the sidelines of the Beijing Winter Olympics for the summit with Xi Jinping, he briefed him on what his plans for Ukraine were, or at least gave him a fairly detailed insight into what he was planning. And he got a full-throated backing from Xi Jinping. So that is one thing. The second is in China, the media is very tightly controlled, as you know, and including the social media. And whatever we see and read coming out on that is all supportive of Russia. There are abuses hurled at Ukraine, abusive remarks about Ukrainians, and things like that by the ordinary Chinese netizen, obviously, because that is what he has been fed. There are also other remarks, and including, mind you, the discussion between Biden and Xi Jinping, where Xi Jinping basically said, we can't do anything, you sort out the problem. And he justified Russia's actions by saying that their national interests were threatened. So the Chinese position is very clear. As far as we are concerned, the fact is, and here I would say unfortunate fact is, that we are dependent on Russia for almost 60% of or 55% of our military technology and supplies. And that really is something that we need to be conscious of, which is why we've been careful, apart from the technology assistance that we are getting from them. But we have started diversifying. and we have to be sensitive. The other point is that there are, there is this is being viewed as something between Russia and Ukraine and the Western powers, which doesn't involve us really. Neither, if I may make a point of saying that when the Chinese came into India in April 2020, when they massed their forces and ingressed, and also since then they've kept about 50, 60,000 troops in readiness on our borders. There hasn't been any noise of support, any voice of support coming from the West either. That may or may not be a calculation of the government, but that certainly is something that Indian strategists do know.
And this narrative of that is being put out there, that you're on the same side of the fence as China when it comes to what is happening in Europe, that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
That's a very mischievous narrative, Amitabh. That's what's being put out by the Chinese. They're doing it systematically. Wang himself has made a couple of remarks like this. Chinese academics have made these remarks saying that we are on the same side. We are certainly not. As I've explained to you, there are two different reasons why we are voting that way, and along with about 35 others. And as far as the oil is concerned, which people are talking about, the US is buying oil from Russia still, and spending about $600 million a day. Germany is buying oil. In fact, they have said we are not going to apply sanctions on Russia as far as oil are concerned. They're buying a huge amount daily basis. So you can't have double standards. And this propaganda that the Chinese are putting out is designed for two reasons. One, to deflect the possibility of sanctions against them by being applied by the US and the West, and that's becoming a stronger likelihood as the days go by. And the second, to try and drive a wedge between the US and us. That hasn't happened. But we have to be careful of that. The Pakistanis, too, you may have noticed, have now started saying the same thing. So it's obviously a programmed effort at creating mischief and deception as far as we are concerned.
Just that last point that you brought up, it dovetails into what somebody who calls themselves your enemy says. Is China trying to step in between the Quad members with clear differences coming out between India and other members in the light of the Ukraine crisis? We've seen the another virtual summit of the Quad leaders. It was in Melbourne, an in-person one. Japan, there's going to be hopefully in-person summit again. How do you see the Quad standing up in the current scenario?
Well, let's be quite honest. I mean, China is certainly trying to create differences between India and the Quad. They do realize that India is probably the key element in Quad taking shape and putting paid to Chinese intentions in the coming years. But at the same time, we need to realize that word used by quote unquote your enemy were differences. There are really no differences. The parties concerned are still talking to each other. They're still, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida came here. There was a lengthy thing. Yes, there was a point of difference, but it wasn't central to their discussions, and neither with Australia. So I think the Quad is intact. It's moving ahead. There will be differences off and on, but that's what democracies are all about, and everyone is conscious of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, your enemy goes on to add on another subject, BRICS will become redundant for India, as was a SARC. And there's another question, and thanks, Chaitanya, for this 100 rupee super chat question that he's asking. Does India need to continue to be part of China-based organizations like the SCO and the Asia Investment Bank?
Well, these are two separate organizations here, but let me just say that the Chinese are quite apprehensive, quite worried, according to reports that one gets, about what they see is India being potentially a spoiler, quote unquote, in the SCO and the BRICS. Because these are, as I said, these are two China-led organizations, and they feel that we could try and disrupt it from within. Having said that, let me also say that if that is the intention, good. But the SCO, frankly, I don't see how we are compatible with the others there. but we happen to be there, so that's all right. But it's not an organization that is going to give us any traction or any benefit that I could see. The second is BRICS. Again, it's an economic organization. We were there, probably the idea being that by being inside, we can still have some kind of influence. But I think that is more applicable as far as the AIIB is concerned. The BRICS, again, is an organization that is not really going to yield much by way of tangible results, in my view.
Uh, there is talk of the rupee ruble trade when it comes to sanctions. Related to that, I mean, not really related, but something on that topic. Meghdut asks, Mr. Rande, China is trying to make its yuan a legal international tender for trade. Even Saudi Arabia reportedly is ready to trade in yuan. Many African nations are cooperating. Russia will use the yuan. What should India do to counter it?
Well, we don't have to do anything except not utilize the yuan. We just should steer clear of the yuan. But one point I would like to make: China has been trying this for a long time now. In fact, they were poised to set up a swap center in London at one point before the Brits realized what China was actually about. I think they realized it much earlier, but they wanted to make a few more pounds as they go along. But here, as far as the alternate currencies is concerned, the basic point is that China doesn't have any credibility and it's not trusted. So people, when they are storing cash, they would rather do it in US dollars or euros rather than the Chinese yuan. Uh, Secondly, the Chinese yuan is susceptible to government manipulation, and we have been seeing it. So these things detract from the yuan really gaining ground as an acceptable international currency.
Global Office 2.0, Mr. Rande says, do you think Xi Jinping will be elected as premier again, looking at what he says is a weak position now?
Well, firstly, Xi Jinping is trying to get re-elected as the president and also as general secretary of the party and chairman of the military commission. Uh, the way things stand now, um, it seems as if he will probably get through and make it. There's no designated successor on the horizon. There's no potential successor on the horizon, though, of course, they can always be found. But having said all this, let me also say that there is resentment under the surface. It's simmering under the surface. And I think what this resentment requires is a senior veteran leader or an adequate number of Chinese Communist Party cadres in the Central Committee to get together to say that we don't want Xi Jinping, and that's going to be extremely difficult because his security system is ubiquitous and very, very pervasive. So unless they can avoid that, I think Xi Jinping, we will see him around after the next party congress towards the end of this year, the 20th party congress.
When we talk about strategic autonomy, related to that, a question from Nakshatra Roy, neither Russia nor China has abandoned autocracy. Putin's brutalizing of Ukraine is a reminder of how essential it is to support the Western order. The alternative is so much worse. I mean, you want to take that, Mr. Rande?
Well, I don't want to get into the situation of whether one is better than the other. I think if we put it on balance, both sides have been, frankly speaking, equally culpable in going into countries on very flimsy on very flimsy pretexts. So that's not worth it by going into that. But I will certainly say that the regime in China, and I've seen the way it is, and probably Soviet Union from what I hear, Russia from what I hear, is not a kind of regime that I personally would like to live under, and I don't think many of us would. We wouldn't like to be told what to do, what to wear, where to go, and what to think. I think that would be anathema. And that is the kind of regime we would get if, as Xi Jinping says, he succeeds in creating, and I quote him, a community of common destiny. What he doesn't mention is under Chinese leadership.
Ranade, if you want to just wrap up your thoughts on where we are currently vis-a-vis China and the road ahead.
Well, I think um, we have a long way to go in economic development and in building up our military capabilities. But I think the first thing is that we have shown a will to stand up and to be firm in holding ground. And I think that goes a big way, a long way, in sending a strong message to the Chinese that we can't just be threatened. It also makes it clear to the Chinese that if they want anything, there will be a fight. And I'm almost sure that in conventional terms, it will be protracted. It's not going to be what the Chinese want, a swift, short, conclusive victory in the end for them. It's going to be protracted, it's going to be bloody, it's going to cause damage on both sides, and it's not going to be a victory for the Chinese, that's for sure. So I think uh, the road ahead is, to my mind, it's going to be uneasy, it's going to be tense. There is no trust between the two. I don't see the Chinese easily yielding ground. So I think we need to prepare for tougher days ahead. And certainly, if I can underline, we must be very, very wary of what the Chinese are, and therefore we need to restrict their ingress into our market.
Mr. Ranade, I absolutely appreciate your experience, your expertise, and the extra time that you've given us here on StratNews Global.
Not at all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we thank all our viewers for their patience through some technical difficulties. Do remind you that you can follow our social media handles for the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. And if you do want to support our kind of journalism and help us get better, there is a link up on your screen. It's also there in the YouTube descriptor. This is the Talking Point on Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh.